He lost his horse, and when he returned, he brought with him a mysterious Apache woman. John had always been a man of the land. From the time he was a young boy, he had felt more at home among the rolling hills, the forests, and the wide-open plains than anywhere else. He loved the quiet of the early morning, when the mist hovered over the fields and the world seemed still, as if waiting for him to make his move. His ranch was modest but well kept, with a small wooden cabin, a barn, and a fenced area for his animals. He lived a simple life, working with his hands and relying on his wits, yet he was proud of it. Among all the animals on his ranch, there was one that meant more to him than any other: his horse, Shadow. Shadow was a black stallion with a sleek coat that shimmered like midnight under the sun. His mane flowed freely, and his eyes were sharp and intelligent. He had been with John for years, carrying him through long rides across difficult terrain, keeping him company during lonely nights, and even helping him herd cattle when needed. Shadow was not just a horse. He was a friend, a partner, and a trusted companion. Losing Shadow would be more than inconvenient, it would be devastating. That morning began like any other. John rose before dawn, as was his habit, and stepped outside to feel the crisp air. The sky was painted in soft shades of orange and pink, and the smell of dew-covered grass filled his senses. He whistled softly, expecting Shadow to come trotting toward him, ears forward, eyes bright, ready for the day. But when he looked around, the stallion was gone. Panic rose in his chest. Shadow had never wandered off like this. John rushed to the stable, hoping the horse had simply wandered close by, perhaps eating fresh hay or exploring the corral. But the stable was empty, and the gate, which he always closed, hung slightly open. It was a small gap, but enough for Shadow to have slipped through. John's mind raced. He thought of all the dangers Shadow could face out in the wild: the steep hills, the rivers, and the predators. Wolves roamed these parts, and stray coyotes could be just as dangerous. He could not waste a single moment. John grabbed his hat, slung a rope over his shoulder, and mounted his smaller horse, Scout, which he used for daily errands around the ranch. He needed to follow Shadow's trail quickly before it disappeared entirely. The ground was soft from the morning dew, and he looked carefully for hoofprints, broken twigs, or any sign that would tell him where Shadow had gone. He found hoofprints leading toward the edge of the forest, where the trees grew dense and dark. He followed them cautiously, aware that the forest could hide many dangers. As he rode deeper into the woods, John thought back to the first time he had met Shadow. He had been a young man then, and Shadow was just a foal, wild and untrained. Many people had told him it would be impossible to tame the horse, that he was too spirited and too strong. But John had been patient. He had spent weeks gaining Shadow's trust, feeding him, speaking to him softly, and showing that he meant no harm. Eventually, the stallion had accepted him, and over the years, their bond had grown stronger than anything John had known. Losing Shadow now felt like losing a part of himself. The forest was quiet, almost eerily so. Birds chirped softly in the distance, and the occasional rustle of leaves hinted at small animals scurrying about. John's heart pounded as he pushed onward, scanning every tree and bush for signs of his companion. The hoofprints continued, but they were faint in some areas, partially covered by fallen leaves. John slowed down, his senses alert. Every snap of a twig, every whisper of wind made him flinch. He knew the forest well, but he also knew that it could be unforgiving. Hours passed as he followed the trail. He called out Shadow's name, his voice echoing through the trees, but there was no response. The sun climbed higher, and the warmth began to cut through the morning chill, yet John felt only anxiety. He thought of the river that ran through the forest and feared that Shadow might have tried to cross it. The current was strong, and if the horse had fallen in, he might not have been able to get out on his own. John's mind raced with possibilities, each one more worrisome than the last. Despite the fear, John pressed on. He remembered advice from his father, who had once said, A man who gives up when things get hard will never find what he seeks. Be patient, watch closely, and never lose hope. John held those words close as he moved forward. He searched the ground meticulously, noting every hoofprint, every broken branch, every tuft of fur caught on a bush. He marked his progress with small scratches on tree bark, so he could retrace his steps if needed. As the day wore on, John grew weary. His muscles ached from hours of riding and walking, and his stomach grumbled from hunger. He knew he needed to find a safe place to rest, but he refused to stop entirely. Shadow had been there for him in difficult times, and now it was his turn to return the favor. He adjusted his hat, wiped the sweat from his brow, and continued along the trail. By late afternoon, the trail became harder to follow. The hoofprints were faint, and some areas of the forest were so dense that John had to dismount and push through branches and underbrush. He stumbled a few times, scraping his hands and legs, but he did not give up. He paused occasionally to listen, hoping for the sound of a familiar neigh. The forest was quiet, but John kept faith that he would hear Shadow soon. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, John reached a clearing he had never seen before. It was small and surrounded by tall pines with a stream running through it. His heart leapt. There were signs here. Broken grass, disturbed soil, and small patches of fur suggested that Shadow had indeed passed through. John tied Scout to a tree and got down to examine the area more closely. He knew he was close. Night was approaching, and John knew he could not continue in the dark without risking injury. He decided to set up a small camp near the clearing, hoping that Shadow might return on his own if he stayed nearby. He gathered some wood and built a small fire, the warmth offering comfort against the chilly evening air. He spoke softly to Scout and whispered Shadow's name into the night, hoping that the sound of a familiar voice would guide the stallion back. As darkness fell, John felt a mix of hope and worry. The forest was alive with sounds, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a coyote, but he did not sleep. He kept watch, scanning the shadows for any movement. Every noise made his heart jump, and every shadow seemed to hint at the presence of his lost companion. He reminded himself to stay calm, to stay patient, and to stay vigilant. Though Part 1 ends with uncertainty, it sets the stage for an adventure filled with determination, resilience, and hope. John's journey to find Shadow is not just about recovering a horse. It is about courage, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between a man and his companion. Little did he know that this search would lead him to unexpected discoveries, and perhaps to someone who would change his life forever. John woke before dawn again, the cold morning air sharp against his face. He had slept little, keeping one eye open while Scout rested. The forest was quiet, except for the occasional rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush and the distant call of birds greeting the new day. John pulled his coat tighter around him and stared into the dim light, trying to imagine where Shadow could have gone. The stallion was strong, intelligent, and experienced in the wild, but John knew the dangers were many: rivers with swift currents, steep cliffs, and hidden predators. He could not afford to delay. After a quick breakfast of dried meat and bread, John mounted Scout and prepared to continue the search. The hoofprints he had followed the previous day had become less clear, partially washed away by the morning dew. He slowed his pace, scanning the ground carefully for even the faintest sign of his companion. Broken twigs, flattened grass, or traces of mud could all provide clues. Every detail mattered. As he rode deeper into the forest, he recalled times when Shadow had helped him in difficult situations. Once, during a violent storm, the stallion had kept him safe from a flash flood by guiding him to higher ground. Another time, Shadow had found his way out of a thick fog, leading John back to the ranch when he had been lost. Memories of these moments gave him hope, reminding him of the bond they shared and the stallion's intelligence. He whispered softly to Scout, "We'll find him, old friend. I promise." The morning passed slowly, and by midday, the forest grew denser. Thick underbrush scratched at John's arms and face as he pushed through, and the canopy overhead blocked much of the sunlight. He dismounted, deciding to check the area on foot, as the trail had become too faint for horseback tracking. With Scout tied to a tree, he carefully stepped through the tangled vegetation, looking for any sign of Shadow. The forest seemed alive with hidden sounds: the snap of a branch underfoot, the flutter of wings above, the rustle of leaves that might conceal animals, or even a glimpse of Shadow. Hours passed with little progress. John began to worry, imagining the worst: Shadow trapped, injured, or even captured by someone. He paused by a small stream to drink and rest, scanning the water for hoofprints in the muddy banks. It was here, as he leaned down, that he noticed something unusual: marks that did not belong to any animal. They were shallow and uneven, like someone had walked barefoot or with light shoes. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. Could someone else be in the forest? Could Shadow have been taken? John stood slowly, tension tightening his muscles. He called softly for Shadow, then listened intently. For a moment, there was only the sound of the flowing stream and the wind in the trees. Then he thought he heard a faint whinny in the distance. His heart leaped. Could it really be Shadow? He moved cautiously toward the sound, staying low and keeping his eyes peeled for any sign of danger. The whinny came again, soft but unmistakable. Relief washed over him, but he reminded himself to remain alert. The forest could hide both help and danger in equal measure. Following the sound, John came across a small clearing. Broken branches and disturbed grass suggested that a large animal had passed through recently. And then he saw it: Shadow's tracks leading further into the forest, crossing over shallow areas of the stream. John felt a rush of hope and excitement, but also caution. He knew the stallion might have been spooked or chased, and there could be other people or animals nearby. He moved carefully, following the tracks, mindful of every step. As he pushed deeper into the wilderness, John noticed other signs of human presence: remnants of a campfire, discarded tools, and faint impressions in the soil. Someone had been here recently, possibly hiding, resting, or hunting. The thought unsettled him. The forest was vast, and while he was experienced in the wild, he knew that meeting an unknown person could be dangerous. He held Scout close, ready to react if needed. The forest had a way of testing courage and skill, and John knew he must remain vigilant. The sun climbed higher, making shadows sharper and the forest more complex. John stopped to rest under the shade of a large pine, pulling water from his canteen. He examined the marks and realized that whoever had been here might have seen him coming. It was a delicate situation. He needed to track Shadow but could not afford to confront strangers unprepared. He whispered to Scout, "We have to be careful, boy. I don't know who's out here." By late afternoon, John had made slow but steady progress. He followed the trail to a rocky hill, where the forest opened slightly, giving a view of the surrounding land. From here he could see the vastness of the wilderness, with rivers winding like silver ribbons, forests stretching endlessly, and cliffs rising sharply in the distance. The beauty of it almost distracted him from his task, but the thought of Shadow kept him focused. Somewhere out there, his companion needed him. As evening approached, John realized he could not continue much further without risking injury in the dark. He decided to make a temporary camp near the base of the hill. He gathered dry wood for a small fire, careful to hide it from view as best he could. He needed light to keep watch, but not enough to attract attention. After tying Scout securely, he started the fire and prepared a small meal. Hunger gnawed at him, but he knew staying alert was more important. While eating, John kept his ears tuned to the forest. Every crack of a branch, every rustle in the underbrush made him tense. His mind wandered to the possibilities. Perhaps Shadow had been frightened by a predator. Perhaps he had stumbled into someone else's territory, or maybe he had simply wandered further than usual. Each scenario made him more determined. He would not rest until he found his horse. Night fell, and with it came the sounds of the forest at full strength. Owls hooted, coyotes howled in the distance, and the wind whispered through the trees. John sat by the fire, scanning the darkness for any movement. He thought of the stories told by old settlers about the dangers of the forest, of animals, bandits, and unknown threats. But John had learned to face fear with careful action rather than panic. He checked his rope, tightened his boots, and made sure Scout was calm. Tomorrow he would follow the trail further, and he would not give up. As he drifted into light sleep by the fire, John dreamed of Shadow. In his dreams, the stallion ran freely through the forest, his black coat glistening under the sun. The horse neighed, calling for John, and he ran to him. The dream felt so real that he woke with a start, listening intently. For a brief moment, he thought he heard a faint neigh in the distance. He rubbed his eyes, hoping it was not a trick of his imagination. Perhaps, just perhaps, Shadow was close. Part 2 sets the stage for the next phase of John's journey, closer to the unknown, facing both the challenges of the wilderness and the mystery of other human presence. His determination grows, his bond with Shadow deepens, and the tension of the search becomes almost unbearable. The forest is no longer just a backdrop. It is a living, breathing character that tests courage, patience, and skill. John awoke to the soft light of dawn filtering through the dense trees. The fire from the night before had died down to glowing embers, and the forest was beginning to stir with life. Birds chirped from high branches, and the rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush reminded him that the forest was never truly still. John stretched his stiff muscles and glanced around the clearing, checking Scout, who was nibbling on grass, seemingly calm. Despite the brief comfort of sleep, John's mind was restless, thinking of Shadow and the faint signs of human presence he had noticed the day before. He mounted Scout and moved slowly, carefully scanning the forest floor for tracks. The trail was faint but present, leading deeper into a part of the forest he had not explored before. The trees grew taller, closer together, and the underbrush became thicker, making progress slow and cautious. John kept calling softly for Shadow, his voice gentle but firm, hoping that the familiar sound would reach his companion. Hours passed with little change. John's heart ached with worry. Shadow could be anywhere, trapped, injured, or frightened, yet he refused to lose hope. As the sun climbed higher, he noticed unusual signs again, footprints that seemed different from ordinary settlers. They were light, uneven, almost like someone moving silently through the forest. John's curiosity mixed with caution. Who could be here? And why had they left traces along the same path as Shadow? He dismounted and approached one of the footprints cautiously. The ground was soft from the morning dew, and he could make out faint impressions of toes and heels. John realized that someone had been moving quietly, possibly trying not to be seen. His pulse quickened. The forest could hold dangers he had not anticipated. Every rustle of leaves, every distant sound of movement made him tense, ready to react. He whispered to Scout, "Stay close. We don't know who's out here." Suddenly, he saw movement ahead, a figure stepping carefully between the trees. At first, it was just a shadow, but then the sunlight revealed the outline of a woman. She was unlike anyone John had ever seen. Her long dark hair flowed freely, and her clothing was made of soft, earth-colored material. Her eyes, sharp and watchful, seemed to take in every detail of the forest around her. She carried herself with a quiet strength, moving with a grace that was both cautious and confident. John froze, unsure how to proceed. The woman noticed him as well, and for a moment they stared at each other silently. Neither spoke, but John could feel the tension in the air. He realized that approaching too quickly could be dangerous. He dismounted slowly, raising his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. "I'm not here to hurt you," he called softly. "I'm looking for my horse." The woman did not respond immediately. She studied him carefully, her eyes scanning his face and body as if weighing his intentions. Finally, in a voice soft but firm, she spoke in broken English. "You lost horse," John nodded. "Yes, he's very important to me. I've been tracking him for days." She paused, her expression unreadable, then said, "Follow me, maybe find." John hesitated for a moment. Could he trust this stranger? Her presence was unexpected, yet he sensed honesty in her words. He noticed the way she moved confidently through the forest, seemingly knowing every step, every hidden danger. With careful steps, he followed her. The forest felt different when she led the way. Paths seemed clearer, hazards avoided, and every step purposeful. John realized that she knew the land intimately, far better than he could ever hope to know. As they walked, John tried to learn more about her. "What's your name?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle. She shook her head slightly, indicating she did not wish to share. "Name not important," she said. John respected her privacy, realizing that her past might be complicated. He focused instead on the journey, watching how she guided him through the forest. By midday, they reached a small clearing near a river. Here, the trail showed signs of Shadow's passage, broken branches, hoofprints, and patches of disturbed soil. John's heart lifted. "We're close," he said, voice full of hope. The woman nodded silently, pointing toward a narrow path that led along the riverbank. As they continued, John noticed how careful she was. She moved quietly, pausing to listen, her eyes scanning for danger. He realized that the forest held threats he had not considered: wild animals, unstable ground, and even other people who might not welcome strangers. Her presence was not just helpful, it was protective. He began to trust her guidance, though he still did not know her story. Late in the afternoon, they came to a steep ridge. From this vantage point, John could see farther into the forest, and there in the distance was a black shape grazing near a small patch of trees. His heart leapt. "Shadow," he called, unable to hide his excitement. The stallion lifted his head, ears flicking, and neighed softly. Relief and joy flooded John's chest. He dismounted, running carefully toward Shadow, his companion's safety finally assured. Shadow recognized John immediately, galloping toward him with powerful strides. John reached out, hugging the stallion's neck, feeling the warmth and strength of his companion. He stroked Shadow's mane, whispering words of comfort. The woman stood a few steps behind, watching silently, a faint smile on her lips. John realized he owed her more than he could express. Her guidance had brought him to Shadow safely. After a moment, John turned to her. "I don't even know how to thank you," he said. She shook her head, speaking softly. "No need, you find horse safe." "That enough?" There was a quiet dignity in her words, a sense that she valued action over words. John nodded, respecting her. As they prepared to leave the area, John noticed something else. The woman's eyes were alert, scanning the forest constantly. He realized that while she had helped him, she also had her own reasons for being here, reasons that she was not sharing. There was mystery about her presence, and he sensed that their meeting was more than mere coincidence. On the way back, John learned small fragments of her knowledge. She showed him hidden paths, safe crossing points over the river, and places where the forest offered food and water. Her skills were remarkable, and John felt a growing respect for her abilities. He asked questions cautiously, curious but careful not to overstep. She answered with simple words, her expressions often speaking more than her broken English. Night approached as they continued their journey. John made a small camp near a stream, tying Shadow securely. The woman helped gather wood, her movements efficient and quiet. They ate a simple meal, and John spoke softly, telling stories of the ranch, of his life, and of the bond he shared with Shadow. She listened, occasionally offering small comments, her expressions thoughtful. Though she remained mysterious, John felt a connection growing, an unspoken understanding between two people who had met in unusual circumstances. As they settled for the night, John thought about the day's events. He had set out to find a lost horse, but he had gained more than he imagined. He had met someone extraordinary, someone who seemed to belong to the forest in a way he could not comprehend. Her presence sparked questions in his mind, curiosity about her life, and admiration for her strength and skill. The forest had revealed both danger and wonder, and John realized that this journey was changing him in ways he had not anticipated. Before sleep, John spoke softly to the woman. "You've helped me more than I can say. I hope, maybe, we can travel together at least for a while." She looked at him carefully, then nodded slightly. It was not a promise, but a sign of trust. In the darkness, with Shadow resting nearby and the forest alive around them, John felt a sense of cautious hope. Their paths had crossed for a reason, and he sensed that the days ahead would reveal more than just the recovery of a horse. They would reveal lessons of trust, courage, and understanding. The night passed quietly, with only the sound of the stream and the occasional call of an owl. John remained alert, watching the forest's shadows, aware that every moment held potential surprises. The woman's presence, though mysterious, was a comfort. Her knowledge of the land made him feel safer. He wondered about her story, her past, and why she had chosen to live in the wilderness. Yet he also understood that some mysteries were meant to unfold slowly, revealing themselves in time. Part 3 concludes with John having successfully reunited with Shadow and meeting the mysterious Apache woman who will play a pivotal role in the next stage of his journey. This part is filled with suspense, curiosity, and the beginning of a bond built on trust and mutual respect. The forest, the search, and the encounter all contribute to a story that is engaging, emotional, and full of tension and wonder. The morning sun rose slowly over the forest, casting golden light through the branches and painting the leaves in warm hues. John stretched, feeling the stiffness in his muscles from the previous day's journey. Shadow grazed quietly nearby, his dark coat gleaming in the early light, and Scout shifted in his stall, sniffing the ground with curiosity. John felt a deep sense of relief having found his horse, yet he knew the journey was not over. The trail back to the settlement would be long and treacherous, and he would not take any risks. Beside him, the woman stirred. She moved gracefully, almost silently, gathering firewood and checking the surroundings. John had learned little of her name or past, but he respected her skill and knowledge. She was cautious but confident, fully aware of the dangers the forest could hold. John felt a quiet admiration for her. She had guided him to Shadow safely, demonstrating not only intelligence but patience and courage. "Ready?" John asked, mounting Scout and securing Shadow to follow. The woman nodded, adjusting her pack and leading the way along a narrow, hidden path she seemed to know by heart. John followed, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The forest was alive with sounds, birds calling, leaves rustling, and the distant trickle of a stream. Every step required careful attention, for the terrain could hide danger in unexpected ways. They traveled in silence for some time, the only sounds being the hoofbeats of Scout and Shadow and the occasional rustle of branches. John noticed how the woman moved effortlessly, stepping lightly over rocks and roots, pausing to inspect the ground or listen for distant noises. He realized that she had survived in this wilderness for a long time, relying on her knowledge and instincts. He felt grateful for her presence, for without her guidance, the journey would have been far more difficult and uncertain. By late morning, they reached a river that had to be crossed. The water was clear and cold, flowing swiftly over smooth stones. John examined the crossing carefully. The current was stronger than it looked, and he worried about Shadow. The woman approached first, testing the path by stepping into the water. She moved with confidence, guiding John to the safest stones, showing him where to place his feet to avoid slipping. Shadow hesitated at first, but with gentle coaxing from John and a reassuring look from the woman, he stepped carefully, making it across without incident. The relief was immense. John patted Shadow's neck and thanked the woman. She nodded, a small smile appearing for the first time that day. They continued, moving through increasingly dense forest where the sunlight barely reached the ground. Here, John noticed subtle signs of danger, broken branches that could indicate predators, footprints that did not belong to Shadow or Scout, and the occasional faint sound of animals nearby. The woman seemed alert to every detail, constantly scanning the environment. John admired her awareness and realized he could learn much from her. As they traveled, John tried to engage her in conversation. "You know these woods well," he said. "You could teach anyone to survive here." She shook her head, replying softly, "Learned young forest teaches." Her voice was calm, steady, but there was a weight behind her words, as if her life had been shaped by challenges he could scarcely imagine. John felt respect deepen, sensing that her survival skills were born of experience, necessity, and resilience. By midday, they came upon a steep incline that led to a rocky ridge. The path was narrow, lined with loose stones and steep drops. John guided Shadow carefully while the woman moved ahead, ensuring the way was safe. Her movements were precise, almost instinctive, and John realized he could trust her judgment completely. As they reached the top, a breathtaking view of the forest stretched before them. Rivers wound like silver threads through green valleys, and distant hills rose like ancient guardians. John paused, catching his breath, and felt a quiet awe at the vastness of the wilderness. The beauty of the landscape, however, did not ease his caution. They were far from the settlement, and night would soon fall. The forest could be merciless after dark, and John knew he had to find a safe place to rest. The woman led him to a sheltered area among boulders, where they could tie Shadow securely and build a fire hidden from view. John watched her work with efficiency and care, gathering wood and arranging it for maximum warmth while ensuring the smoke would not be visible from afar. As they settled near the fire, John felt a moment of gratitude. He had not expected to find such a capable and knowledgeable companion, and yet here she was, guiding him safely through unknown terrain. He fed Shadow and Scout, giving them water and encouraging them to rest. The woman watched silently, her eyes alert, scanning the forest as though she expected danger to appear at any moment. John understood that her caution was not fear, it was wisdom. Night fell quickly, bringing cooler air and the sounds of nocturnal creatures. Owls hooted from high branches and the distant howl of a coyote echoed through the forest. John wrapped himself in his coat and glanced at the woman. "Do you stay here alone often?" he asked, curiosity and concern in his voice. She shook her head slightly, replying simply, "Sometimes alone, sometimes people, not always safe." Her words were brief but telling. Her life had likely been filled with both solitude and danger. John felt a mixture of empathy and respect, realizing that her resilience had been forged through experience he could scarcely imagine. During the night, they kept watch in turns. John noticed how instinctively alert the woman was, always noticing the subtle sounds of the forest, the snap of a twig, the shift of leaves, the faint rustle of small animals. She had taught him, silently, to read the environment in a way he had never before considered. Every detail mattered, and he understood that survival was about observation, patience, and careful action. The next morning, they resumed their journey, moving through a mix of forest and open land. John found that he had come to rely on her guidance completely. She knew the safest paths, the hidden dangers, and even small natural resources they could use along the way. Her presence gave him confidence, and he began to feel a growing trust, not just in her knowledge but in her judgment, her courage, and her calm presence in the face of uncertainty. Along the way, they encountered a series of obstacles. A fallen tree blocked the path, and a shallow creek had swollen overnight from rain. Each time, the woman assessed the situation carefully, showing John how to maneuver without risking injury. Shadow and Scout followed faithfully, responding to John's gentle commands and the calm guidance of the woman. John marveled at how well she understood the forest, how she could anticipate difficulties and solve problems efficiently. By late afternoon, they reached a small hilltop with a vantage point overlooking the surrounding land. John paused to catch his breath and admired the view. From here, he could see the distant outline of the settlement, the place he had been trying to return to for days. Relief mixed with exhaustion, yet he knew the journey was not over. The forest could still hold surprises, and they needed to navigate carefully to reach safety. As they moved down the hill, John began to appreciate the quiet strength of the woman beside him. She rarely spoke, yet her presence was reassuring. Every movement she made was purposeful, every glance deliberate. John realized that the bond they were forming was built on mutual respect and shared experience. They were no longer strangers. They were traveling companions, united by a shared goal and the challenges of the journey. By evening, they found a safe clearing for another camp. John tied Shadow and Scout securely, while the woman prepared a small fire. They ate a simple meal, sharing no words but understanding each other's presence. The forest around them was alive with sounds, yet they felt a quiet sense of security. John reflected on the journey so far, recognizing that the recovery of Shadow had become more than a mission. It had become a journey of learning, trust, and discovery. As night fell, John spoke softly, breaking the silence. "I don't know your name, but I am grateful for your help. I don't think I could have done this without you." She glanced at him briefly, then returned her gaze to the fire. Her expression was calm, almost unreadable, yet there was a hint of acknowledgement in her eyes. John felt that even without words, a connection had formed, a silent understanding of shared purpose and mutual respect. The night passed quietly, with only the sounds of the forest and the gentle breathing of the horses nearby. John lay awake for a while, thinking of the lessons he had learned: patience, observation, and the importance of trust. The woman had shown him that the forest was not just a place of danger, but also a teacher, offering knowledge to those willing to pay attention. He realized that the journey had changed him, teaching him not only about the wilderness but also about the strength of those who live within it. As dawn approached, John knew that the next day would bring the final stretch of their journey. The settlement was near, and safety was within reach. Yet he also understood that this journey had given him more than he expected. It had brought him friendship, insight, and respect for someone whose life had been shaped by courage, skill, and resilience. The recovery of Shadow was no longer just about returning home. It was about the bond formed through shared experience and the lessons learned along the way. Part 4 ends with John and the Apache woman navigating the forest together, successfully recovering Shadow, overcoming obstacles, and deepening their trust and understanding. The journey prepares them for the final part of the story, where they will return to the settlement and face new challenges and revelations. The first light of dawn spilled over the horizon as John, Shadow, Scout, and the Apache woman began their final stretch toward the settlement. The night had been quiet, the forest calm, as though it knew this journey was drawing to a close. John felt a mix of relief and anticipation. He had recovered his prized horse, survived the treacherous forest, and even made the acquaintance of someone extraordinary. Yet he also knew that returning to the settlement would bring new challenges, curiosity, questions, and perhaps even suspicion from the people who had never seen someone like her. The morning air was crisp and clean. John led the way, moving carefully along a narrow trail. Shadow followed closely, his ears twitching as he scanned the surroundings, while Scout stayed beside him. The woman moved silently ahead, stepping lightly over rocks and roots, her eyes constantly alert. John could not help but admire her. She was quiet but confident, cautious but fearless. Her presence had made the journey safer, her knowledge of the land invaluable, and her calm, steady demeanor reassuring. As they descended the final ridge, the settlement came into view. Smoke rose gently from chimneys, and the faint sounds of daily life, children laughing, livestock calling, people working, reached their ears. John felt a surge of relief. Home was near, and yet he was aware that the appearance of the Apache woman would stir curiosity, and perhaps unease, among the townspeople. He glanced at her and saw her watching the settlement with quiet interest, her expression unreadable. The path into town was uneven, flanked by tall grasses and small trees. John slowed his pace, giving both horses time to adjust. "We're almost there," he whispered to Shadow, who neighed softly in reply. The woman remained silent, her gaze sweeping the area. John realized that she too seemed wary, not of him, but of the settlement itself. She had lived in the wilderness for so long that human habitations, noise, and crowds might be unfamiliar or even unsettling. As they reached the edge of the settlement, a few early risers noticed them. John called out to them, his voice carrying over the quiet morning. "It's me, John." "Shadow's safe." A few neighbors stepped out, their eyes widening as they saw the black stallion and the woman walking beside him. Whispered questions passed between them. Who was she? Where had John been? What was this stranger doing here? John kept his voice calm, but inside he felt a twinge of anxiety. The woman walked quietly beside him, her posture upright, her eyes alert. She seemed to sense the tension in the air, and yet she did not falter. John noticed how her presence commanded respect, even among people who did not yet understand her. She moved with a quiet dignity, her calm aura drawing attention without effort. Children peeked from behind doorways, livestock stirred at the horses, and neighbors gathered slowly, curiosity and caution written on their faces. John dismounted first, patting Shadow's neck affectionately. "He's safe," he repeated, his voice steady. "I found him in the forest." The crowd murmured, some impressed, some skeptical. John glanced at the woman and said quietly, "This is the woman who helped me." He did not introduce her fully. He knew she preferred simplicity and privacy. She nodded slightly, acknowledging him but saying nothing more. Whispers spread through the settlement. The townspeople were intrigued by her appearance, her clothing, and her presence. She was unlike anyone they had seen before, her movements precise and confident, her gaze calm and discerning. Yet she did not speak unnecessarily, letting her actions convey her purpose. John could sense that some were curious, some wary, but most were quietly impressed. Her skill, courage, and knowledge of the wilderness were evident, even to those unfamiliar with such life. John guided Shadow and Scout toward the stable, tying them securely while ensuring they were comfortable. He offered the woman a place to rest in his cabin, though she declined politely. She preferred the open air, the forest that was still very much a part of her life. John respected her choice. "Stay close, then," he said softly. "You've done more than I could have asked. At least let me make sure you are safe." She nodded briefly, her eyes reflecting a quiet gratitude, and moved toward a sheltered spot near the edge of the forest, where she could observe both the settlement and the open land. Over the next few hours, John attended to the townspeople's questions. They wanted to know where he had been, how he found Shadow, and who the mysterious woman was. John spoke cautiously, sharing only what was necessary. He explained that Shadow had wandered into the wilderness, and that the woman had guided him through difficult terrain, keeping him safe. He avoided sharing details that might compromise her privacy or draw unnecessary attention. Most of the townspeople listened with awe, impressed by her abilities, though some remained skeptical. The woman remained mostly quiet, observing the settlement with keen interest. Occasionally she offered small, helpful gestures, guiding children away from unsafe areas, showing how to cross a small stream safely, or pointing out signs of wildlife near the outskirts. Her actions spoke louder than words, demonstrating wisdom, skill, and care. John noticed how quickly she adapted, assessing each situation with calm precision. He realized that her presence was quietly changing the settlement, not through force, but through example and competence. As the day wore on, John found himself talking with her more openly. "You've done so much for me," he said. "I don't even know your story, yet I feel like I owe you my life." She looked at him, her dark eyes steady, and replied simply, "I help where needed." Her words were modest, but John sensed there was depth behind them, a lifetime of experience and survival distilled into a few quiet phrases. In the evening, John decided to walk Shadow to a nearby field, allowing him to stretch his legs and graze. The woman followed silently, her presence reassuring. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, John reflected on the journey. What had begun as a mission to recover a horse had become so much more. He had discovered courage, resilience, and the value of trust in someone whose life had been shaped by adversity. Neighbors began to leave for the day, returning to their chores and homes, leaving John, the woman, and the horses in a quiet calm. The woman finally spoke, her voice soft but clear. "You trust me," she said. John nodded. "Yes, I do. And I hope you trust me too." She considered his words carefully, then gave a small nod. It was a simple acknowledgement, but it carried weight, a bond formed through shared experience, challenge, and respect. Night fell fully, and the settlement became quiet. John led Shadow and Scout back to the stable, checking that both horses were secure. He returned to the woman who had settled near the forest edge. "The night will be quiet here," he said gently. "You're safe." She nodded, her eyes scanning the stars above. For a moment they shared silence, a quiet connection forged through hardship, survival, and mutual respect. As they sat near the faint glow of a fire, John felt a sense of peace. Shadow was safe, the journey was complete, and yet the presence of the woman reminded him that life held mysteries and lessons still waiting to unfold. He realized that she had not just guided him through the forest, she had taught him about trust, patience, and the strength found in quiet confidence. In the following days, the woman remained near the settlement, helping where she could but maintaining her independence. The townspeople grew accustomed to her presence, learning to respect her skill, wisdom, and quiet authority. Children admired her agility and courage, neighbors sought her advice on the wilderness and survival, and John found in her a friend and confidant unlike any other. She remained mysterious, never fully revealing her past, yet her actions spoke volumes. John often reflected on the journey. He had set out simply to find a lost horse, but he returned with more than he expected. He had found a companion, a guide, and a teacher. He had learned that courage and resilience could appear in many forms, and that trust, once earned, could create bonds stronger than words. The journey had changed him, the forest had tested him, and the woman had shown him a perspective he had never known. As the story closes, John and the Apache woman stand together at the edge of the forest, looking out over the settlement and the land beyond. Shadow grazes peacefully nearby, and Scout rests calmly. The sun rises higher, casting light on the world they now share. Though mysteries remain about her past and her journey, her presence has left an indelible mark on John, the settlement, and the story of courage, trust, and friendship that began with a lost horse and a simple journey into the forest. John knows one thing for certain: some meetings are destined, some bonds unspoken, and some journeys transform lives in ways that endure far beyond the return home. And for him, Shadow and the mysterious woman, this was one of those journeys.